So welcome to CIS 118, Web Development and Design Foundations. Last time we wrapped up our homework on Chapter 7, which between 6 and 7 are the two most challenging chapters, I think, in the textbook, but also the two most powerful chapters in terms of the ability to lay out your content, structure, and style it with CSS. So in Chapter 7, we had covered relative links, how to have embedded links on your page or link to files within a directory structure that's got the assets for a complex website, how to set up what are called fragment identifiers on the same page to jump to different spots on the page and avoid the scroll of death, where you did have a web page that needed some length to it. How to embed telephone and text messaging capability into your web page, and of course the most important part of that chapter was how to run a media query and have your browser dynamically determine what type of device it's running on and invoke different style sheets for the content of your site or your page based upon the maximum resolution that the media query returned to the browser from the device that the client was running that site on. It certainly doesn't make any sense to use a texting capability off of a desktop computer, so that's something that you would only want to code in if the device running the web page were actually a smartphone, right? So we made those modifications to our running case study in Chapter 7. We also looked at sprites, was just a way to combine a whole bunch of graphics into small graphics, that is, into one download, so you didn't have to incur the penalty of talking to the server every time you needed an image. So we looked at the sprites, and you had to specify where in that composite image your sprite was. We looked at how to generate a 3-column format rather than a 2-column. 2-column was pretty easy. You just took your nav area and did a float left and then set a right margin and then set a left margin for your main, about 10 pixels past the right margin for your nav area. And it's just as easy with a 3-column format here in Chapter 7, in that you still float your nav area to the left, you still set the left and right margins for your main, and then you use another HTML5 feature called an aside that allowed you to set that up with a float right. So that's what we covered in Chapter 7. If you are still struggling with that material, there are plenty of hands-on exercises embedded in the chapter, which I'm not sure any of you are actually doing, but I hope you do those, because the data that you need to play with those is all in the Canvas site underneath each particular topic. And if this is working right, you should see my share screen right now. And if we scroll down the list into topics, where we left off 7 last time and then now topic 8, you can see that there are data files for each one of these chapters. So all the embedded hands-on exercises, you should be downloading those starter files and running those things, particularly with the use of the media queries. Now, to actually test to see if your media query is going to work, there are a couple of websites there that the textbook recommends for validating your code to make sure it looks proper on that device. And of course, we can't actually test our responsive design if we don't have it running on a particular device, right? So you can do a couple of things. You can test with your desktop browser and resize the viewport to match the resolution of your style sheet, or you can go off and run what I recommend, which is the mobile phone emulator, and that's referenced on page 342 of your textbook. So we looked again at how to design those media queries and how you can set up graphics to also be properly scaled based upon the resolutions that come back from your media query. So I encourage you to go back and take a look at all the elements, particularly the sizes attribute, and then the source set attributes, and those were covered on page 340 and 341, that allow you to use a series of images on your web page and have it look proper regardless of what device people are running on. And again, Chapter 7 is just a review of 7 because Chapter 8 is quite short today. So with regards to an eye on the future, the CSS 3 that's coming with a flex box or flexible box layout design will allow you to work with the elements on your page in a more, I guess, convenient mode in terms of just rearranging the components on the page. So that's where we left off with Chapter 7. We went through and modified the running case study, which I am going to make available here at the end of the week. So Chapter 8 is due soon. I'm going to make Chapter 7, which was already due, available by the end of the week, so those of you who still have a deficit from Chapter 7 at least won't be penalized for Chapter 8. We also have a midterm that's due at the end of the week. It's been open for a whole week. It's 100 questions. You've got 150 minutes. It's all multiple choice, true, false. And it's worth a big portion of your grade. There's really no reason not to get that done in time. Be advised that that exam will close at the end of the week, and you must get it taken care of by then. Okay, so again, protracted review of Chapter 7, but again, it is probably the most powerful chapter in the textbook in terms of what you can do to style your content and have it be responsive, and that it works on any number of different devices. Okay, so what I want to do now is go over the PowerPoint for our very brief chapter, Chapter 8, on how to work with tables. And tables have been around since the dawn of HTML. They were used before CSS came along as a way to structure the content of your web page. We're going to go over basic table features, the table element in HTML, table row, table header, table cell, elements, how to configure the table sections with the table header, table body, and table footer. These are the new features in CSS. How to make your table available to those who use assistive technologies. And what are the purposes of the structural pseudo classes in terms of applying different formatting, background, color, font considerations based on the position a particular row has in your table. So each individual table cell is at the intersection of a row and column, just like Excel. I'm sure everyone's had at least some familiarity with putting information into an Excel sheet. So just like in Excel, you can format individual rows or columns or cells. You can do the same thing with HTML. So you have to use the appropriate table, TR, and TD elements. Table is the overall table feature, and then TR stands for table row, and TD stands for table data. It refers to the specific cell in a table. You can also take advantage of the caption feature, and if you use the caption feature inside of the table definition, all of these have opening and closing tags. It'll take whatever text you provide between the caption tags and put that at the top of your table. So in this instance, I've got my table tag and my closing tag, and I've specified that it has a border. If I don't want a border, I put border equals 0. I've taken advantage of the caption tags, and then I don't have to indent these, but because the browser ignores white space, but it's near to impossible to maintain a complex table if you don't have some type of formatting in the file that makes it readable. So I've got these table rows opened and closed at a tab further out than the actual cell items. So my TD table data or my cell data for the first table row, that means that these will be the first and second columns worth of data in the first row. And then my next TR element or set of tags is going to define the second row, and the third set defines the third row, and then I just close the table. So if I type in this HTML into my HTML file and open it in a browser, I'm going to see the table that you see pictured here in the slide. I can also use the table heading element. It applies at a cell level. It replaces the TD or the table data. And if I do that, it will bold the contents of that particular cell. And you typically find that in the first row if you want to have like a caption row on the columns for your table. So there are a number of HTML attributes that I can use to format the content of the table, but understand almost every one of these has been deprecated. There's been a move in the industry to use CSS to configure the table characteristics instead of base HTML. Now, we mention them here because you will likely run across some archaic code, or you might be in a position where you have to update a site, and it might still be using these deprecated features. All of these, it isn't that the features are gone, it's that the features have been moved over to CSS, and we can style the table using our CSS. So these are the attributes in HTML. Again, almost all have been deprecated, and then these are the table cell attributes that are common to HTML that, again, have either been declared obsolete or have been deprecated and that they are on their way out the door. So notice a couple of them that are still in place are column span and row span, and these are like cell merges in Excel, in that if I've got a particular table row and I specify with my table data tag how many columns I want it to span, that means that it's going to merge the first and second column into one. So this is a way that I might, for instance, put a merge and then put a header across the top of a table, just the same way you would use Excel to do the same feature. I can also use the row span, and again, I apply this at the TD or the table data or cell level, and I specify how many rows this cell is going to span. In this instance, it's not a merge that's going to be across the top of two columns. It's going to be a merge that spans multiple rows, and it doesn't have to be at the top of your table. It doesn't have to be the first two rows of your table, but when you specify the row span here, it will merge those rows. So notice this in the subsequent row. In the first row, there's this first column because it's going to span two rows. The second row does not have a cell for column one because it's taken up by the two rows in the span. Okay, so your book talks a lot about how to make tables accessible to those who use assistive technologies. So what that means is on a table heading, which defines the column for a particular table, we can define an ID. And then for all of the table cell items, which we define with a TD or a table data, we can then associate with that, using the keyword headers, whatever the ID was defined for that column's worth of data. For example, if I come in here and I rewrite my table in the prior example for assistive technology, instead of just having the table header name and date, which again, these are the column headers, instead of using the TH or the table header tag, I can, inside of that element, define an ID. And this is what I want, and it's arbitrary, whatever I want to pick here. So these would be my names for these columns. And then down in the rows, I can associate with each cell that particular column header, column name or column date. So a text-to-speech reader would be able to go through those tags, and for people that need that type of support, be able to make sense of this table. Notice it doesn't look any different from the prior one. What about using CSS to style tables? I've got there's a table in your textbook that talks about the older HTML attribute and then the CSS property that corresponds to that. If I want to align my table, I can center align it, or I can center align within a table cell. So if I want to align text in a cell, for instance, this text align colon center, that's the property value pair. I can specify background color padding, border spacing. If I want to get rid of borders entirely among the cells and the border of the table, I can use border collapse. I can specify height and width. I can specify whether I want horizontal alignments by default. I can specify vertical alignment, and I can control with precision what type of border I want, what type of spacing I want, and if I want a border at all. I can also put a background image. Rather than go through and set up a whole bunch of IDs, a whole bunch of style rules that then I would apply to HTML elements in the table, I can set up what are called CSS pseudo-classes for my tables, and these pseudo-classes follow the particular table selector feature, just like you did with the hyperlinks. And I can apply a certain set of styles to the first element of a table or a row. I can specify the last of, I can specify the nth of type. This is the feature that I'm going to use to set up what's called a zebra stripe on a table. In other words, alternate colors in the rows. So I just use the TR selector, table row, nth of type. I can give it a specific line number or a row number, or I can say even or odd, and then whatever I put in my curly braces, that's how the CSS will style the contents of those rows of my table. I can also take advantage of new features in CSS that define a table header, a table body, and a table footer. Just like we have a header or a nav area and a main and a footer on our web page, we can have a table head, a body, and a footer, and have the ability to format these sections of the table differently. So if I want a bold header, let's say, on top of this table, I put those features in the table heading, and notice I've defined an ID here for the columns, and I've done that because I'm going to have assistive technologies take advantage of that by having every cell refer to which row and column it's in. And I define my body, and then I can style my footer separately, so I could, in this example, you can see I've got a separate total. I can also define the background shading differently if I choose to do that. Okay, so like I said, a really brief chapter. It's just kind of a shotgun introduction to how to use tables. Next time we meet, I'm going to go through the homework, and there's not an awful lot out there. I gave you the standard review questions, and then apply your knowledge, and then the hands-on exercises 1 through 5. We also have a minor modification to our running case study. If you look ahead here in Chapter 8, we're going to actually add a table to the Pacific Trails case study on our yurts page. And then we're going to style that table using CSS that we add to our pacifictrails.css file. So the submission for case study Chapter 8, there's only 2 files you need to upload. And that's going to be your CSS, your style sheet, pacific.css style sheet, and then the yurts page, yurts.html. That's it. So next time I see you, we'll go over the homework. We'll make the modifications to those 2 files in the case study, and we'll move forward. If you're struggling with anything, let me know. I can't help you if I don't hear from you. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Thank you.